How do you know when it's time to move on from your teacher, not necessarily to another teacher, but to pause, to digest, and perhaps not look for validation? How did you move on from your teachers? I was really lucky. I had teachers who recognized in me or in our experience that we had reached a moment where it was time to move on. So as I was feeling those feelings of it's time to move on or time to take a break or whatever you're thinking of, Michael, that they also recognized it at the same time. And I was very lucky that they were self-aware enough to say, I think it might be time for you to move on to another teacher. I've basically shown you what I know about these topics, and I'm used to teaching this level, and you should move on to another teacher. So I was very lucky that they were able to do that for me. That happened to me when I was in my first trombone teacher. Sent me to a second trombone teacher who I think was recommended by my middle school band director or something. And I stayed with him for a couple of years. And then he had some personal stuff go on. And then also the same situation happened where I was moving in the direction of playing jazz. And he was like a more well-rounded kind of local player. And he was like, you should go and study with Mark Kellogg at Eastman. And I was nice enough that when I was in high school, Mark took me on as a student. And then stayed with Mark all through college. But I did get a chance to take a break from his teaching when he went on sabbatical my junior year. And so I studied with Clay Jenkins, the trumpet professor, and Jeff Campbell, the bass professor. And those were really interesting semesters for me to get a totally different perspective. So what I can say in regard to your question is like when you're feeling like it's time, you should take a break and you should go explore, because I think it's necessary to get as many perspectives as you can. Sometimes it takes one lesson. Sometimes it takes just a relationship. Like I didn't have that many lessons with Wycliffe Gordon. I went to lots of gigs. I went to his house a couple of times for lessons, but the lessons were like long and in-depth and experiences like all day, as opposed to a once a week for an hour kind of thing. But they all affect you in different ways and get you to think about different stuff. So I would recommend it's always a good idea to get a lesson from someone coming through town. You go somewhere, take your horn, get a lesson. Getting that new perspective is always welcome. I think back about all the different lessons that I have. I wish I had done more. If I could go back and do one, when I was at Juilliard, I pushed harder to get a lesson with Joe Alessi. He would have been probably really good for getting some of the fundamental stuff that's still iffy, getting it out of there and getting it taken care of. But to know when it's time, I don't think you'll ever know when it's time. So I think you should always be always looking at other options and seeing how different people are. Like some teachers are always going to be in your back pocket to help you, and some aren't. Some are more like, I learned this from this person. I learned resilience from this person. I learned to explore from this person. These different types of educational experiences that you can get from different types of educational approaches. And some people didn't come up in a strong education program. They don't have the knowledge or the experience to know what's good and bad from a teacher, because they just have what their experience was, which is totally valid and totally fair, but is difficult sometimes to relate. So I hope that answers your question, Michael. I think if you feel like it's time, then it's time. If you're in school and it's like you're stuck, and I don't mean that negatively, but if you're in a situation where someone is assigned to you as a teacher, you should talk to them about what alternative plans you could make to not necessarily not be in their studio, but how can we work together in a different way? How can we work together to make the most out of this time if there's not an option to switch to another teacher? Just like maybe do a lesson swap, get different experiences. I always think it's worth it I encourage my students to do the same thing. They want to stay for another degree. I'm like, are you sure you really want to do that? I'm going to tell you the same thing over and over again. So maybe go study and hear the same thing from somebody else. Maybe that will be the thing that clicks.